A returning guest, but coming in a different role this time. New leadership role, new vision. This is Evan Falchuk, who's running for governor. Hi, Evan.
Hey, how are you?
Good, thanks. How are you?
Great to be here.
Great to have you again. So, Evan, you were working for Best Doctors, and now you're running for governor. That's kind of a leap, isn't it?
It's very entrepreneurial in both cases. Now, what I'm doing here in Massachusetts is I've created a new political party called the United Independent Party, and I'm running for governor. And the idea behind the party is taking the idea of being socially progressive and putting it together with being fiscally sensible, which is where I think most voters are.
Which is apple pie.
Yeah, well, except that the two parties aren't providing that combination to people. And here in Massachusetts, more than 52% of voters are now unenrolled in any political party. 35% are registered Democrats, 11% are registered Republicans. So the two parties are shrinking in size, even as independents are growing. And when you survey independent voters, and actually voters across the state, which I did earlier this year, you find that what people say is that the parties are no longer representing the priorities that voters have. And that's the missing piece of politics, not just in our state, but around
But that's
the
not
country.
new. That's a few 100-year-old issue in America. It could be a multi-thousand-year-old issue elsewhere. How do you overcome the mechanism and the infrastructure of government that everybody has to inherit? And I think a lot of people go in with good intentions.
They do, and one of the challenges that's out there is the structure, as you point out, of the two-party system in particular. So listen to some of these barriers that have been put up. If you're a Democrat or Republican, under rules that have been established by Democrats and Republicans, you're allowed to raise $15,000 from each individual through a complicated mixture of state and federal accounts. As an independent, someone trying to create a new party, I'm allowed to raise $1,000 per person. So it's a 15-to-1 financial advantage. And when you hear about Democrats and Republicans complaining about the influence of money in politics, it's interesting to realize that they actually know how to limit the amount of money in politics because they do it against independent politicians. So they've created a two-party system that is sort of by, and for the two-party representatives and the people who fund it. And we need to move back to one that's more in line with our democratic
So why not
principles.
start a political action committee and get a ground group of people that you sort of represent instead of running for office? Would that have been a better way to do it? We talked about that offline, about somebody else who actually started that way.
Right. I have created a political action committee by creating the new party, the United
Right.
Independent.
And how many people are a member of the party so far?
Well, it's one of the, again, many barriers that are in place. I've had lots of people changing the registration to
Right.
United Independent. The state then keeps track of that through any one of the 351 city and town clerks that exist across the state of Massachusetts. But it isn't publicly available like many things in our government as far as how that goes. But the way that you can become an official party is if a candidate gets 3% of the vote in a statewide race, which if as a candidate for governor I can get 3%, which is maybe 75,000, 80,000 people, then United Independent becomes an official party.
Has there ever been a third party in Massachusetts?
There was, for a short period of time, the Green Party was an official party
Right,
in
I remember.
Massachusetts, and then it didn't run a statewide candidate, didn't get the votes, and now we're back to just the Democrats and Republicans.
So, what did you learn as an entrepreneur and a leader that makes you feel that you're better prepared today to be doing what you're doing?
One of the most important things in business that successful business people are able to do is to understand what is the market, and more importantly, what does each individual want? What do they need? What problem do they have that I can help solve through my business, through my work, through whatever it is that I'm doing? And the political process has become co-opted. And what has happened with the two parties is that they've become mechanisms to find politicians that will help get voters to go along with the agenda of those parties, as opposed to finding out what the public wants and then using the machinery of government to give the public what it's looking for. And that's the gap, that's the disconnect. And yes, it's the kind of thing that has been typical in politics and history, but it's become far, far worse today than I think it's ever been because of the outsized influence of money in politics. There's an enormous amount of it. There are ways to prevent it from being in here, but the two parties who've created the rules that they complain about won't change them.